Thanks to the legendary commanders Shovah and Shavah, the Tau Empire has emerged victorious from a costly war with the Imperium of Man. With his comrade now in stasis following the death of their mentor, Commander Puretide, Farsight has led his people in a reconquest of the Damocles Gulf. But he has disobeyed the Ethereals accompanying him in order to hunt down an Ork infestation. In this, the final part of his tale, the upcoming war will change Shovah forever, leading to both his excommunication from the Tau Empire and the establishment of the independent Farsight enclaves. My name is Michael for Tactica Imperialis, and welcome to 40k Stories. With only a single world left to reconquer in order to complete his mission, Farsight left the enclaves of the Damocles Gulf to pursue the Orks. In doing so, he initiated a system-spanning war that quickly spiraled out of all control. As the other castes began repopulating the enclaves that he had conquered, Shovah's fleet readied for war. Leaving only a small garrison to defend the colonies, he set out for the Vorak asteroid belt to clear it of Orks. His plan was for the Tau Navy to use their range to pick the Orks apart without risking anyone. The concept was sound, but the plan soon faltered. Long-range scans betrayed an incredible truth. The asteroids were not hiding the Ork fleet, they were the Ork fleet. Gigantic clumps of debris had been sheathed with scrap metal and weapons, with crude engines the size of biodomes attached. Farsight wasted no time cross-referencing the symbols carved into the ships with those of the Ork invasions in the past. Sure enough, these greenskins had been encountered many years before, preying upon the space lanes of Dalith. After a short war, the threat had been declared neutralized. Not nearly neutralized enough. The Orks had evidently fled to the fringes of the Empire, hoping to prey upon the newly established colonies, much as a savannah hunter seeks the youngest prey. Extremely vexed, Farsight formulated a meticulous plan to exterminate all ships. With Admiral Koro Limau Teng's finest pilots, the Tau fell upon the clumsy Ork fleet with dizzying speed. Each asteroid could barely turn its guns to the Tau before each engine was blown apart. The spectacle was repeated for weeks, and Farsight's progress could be followed by the string of lights he stitched across the stars. The sheer number of the Ork bases was their only defense, though the now accepted tactic of killing the Ork leader and throwing his followers into anarchy was next to impossible. Furthermore, while Farsight was methodically smashing base after base, hundreds of the furthest asteroid ships were accelerating towards the next system. Once most asteroid ships had been destroyed or driven off, Farsight reported to his Ethereal advisors that the greenskin menace was greatly reduced and he could dispatch a full half of the fleet to return to the enclaves. They nodded, but as Farsight was about to leave triumphantly, they revealed something to him. Admiral Koro Limau Teng had been killed by a hidden missile base whilst overseeing an extermination order. Farsight's eyes narrowed for a moment, but he bowed, asking for leave to go and meditate. When he emerged, his resolve had hardened once more. The fleet would not be returning, not yet. The Orks would be pursued, and every last one would be put to the torch. Unbeknownst to Shovah, his strike into the Vorak belt had initiated war against a foe who had not only fought against the Tau before and survived, but who had come to understand them in turn. Grog Iron Teeth, war chief of Al Santa, had learned the hard way that the Tau could outrange the Orks in space. So he planned to draw them away from the enclaves and engage them up close on the most rugged, congested planets he could find. Plenty of cover, lots of hiding places, from which he could start what he thought as a proper fight. The remaining asteroid ships spread into two fleets as they neared the Magi system on the fringes of the Gulf. Farsight's armada monitored them as best they could. One plunged toward the deserted world of Arthas Malok, the other toward the Tau-held planet, Atari Vo. A large, dagger-shaped asteroid flew at the heart of the latter fleet, and Farsight concluded that a flagship shaped like a weapon would appeal to an Ork leader. He gave the order to head for Atari Vo, and he was correct. The dagger asteroid was indeed his quarry's flagship. Veteran Ork players may know what follows as the War of Daka. It was a thing in the 4th edition codex, if you want to look it up. Signaling the Tau on Atari Vo, Farsight prepared to make planetfall and join with their firecast against the imminent invasion. The Ataran Tau and their Dalithan reinforcements were still scrambling their own fleet when they received the chilling message that the asteroids would not be slowing. The Orks intended to smash them into the planet with as much force as possible. It was the same as at Arkanasha, only this time the target was a world of cities and gardens instead of a planet-sized desert. At first, the Tau were confused by Farsight's presence this side of the Gulf and refuted his claim, but as the asteroids came down, the truth became horribly clear. They slammed into the main continent Vohai, each one snuffing out millions of lives on impact. The dagger-shaped flagship drove itself deep into the capital city, Tau Rota Shah, jewel of the white-walled cities of Atari Vo. It was reduced to a crater in the space of seconds. The surviving Tau hoped the Orks had died executing these insane tactics, but they were horribly wrong. Protected by shield cores in each warship, the Orks seethed from the wreckage in a storm of aggression. Wherever the Tau engaged them, the Orks returned fire with crackling energy beams and salvaged Tau weaponry. The volume of fire was unlike anything the Tau had encountered before, and the craters provided enough cover to weather the firing solutions of the Firecast. Farsight docked in the planet's sky stations and joined the battle on the planet below, but it was soon clear they were fighting a very different breed of Ork. Hulking leaders in glyph-covered greatcoats unleashed blasts of blinding green fire from their multi-barreled guns, each powerful enough to punch through a battlesuit. These are flashkits. Captured hammerheads and sky rays lurched from the rocks, plasma fire splashing from their hulls as they ploughed into their former owners. Whirring Ork copters spat hails of fire, forcing the Tau into cover as yet more Orks spilled from the breaches. At dozens of impact sites, the battle intensified until Tau blood mingled with the blackish ooze of the Ork fallen. Salvation was delivered, finally, but not by the Firecast. Whole shoals of barracudas and tiger sharks of the Aircast were dispatched, their advance preceded by waves of piranhas mowing down mob after mob of Orks with their burst cannons. The Manta missile destroyer Ores por Carrion slaughtered those Orks nearest the wrecked dagger ship with a storm of railguns, and the Sunshark bombers soaring from low orbit washed the ruins clean with chains of plasma bombs. As yet more pilots joined, the Orks fled into their impact craters. With his foes on the run, Farsight pressed the advantage, leading his own warriors over the lip of the dagger ship's impact crater and falling on the Orks below. Only then did the true cunning of Grog become clear. Thousands of Orks spilled into the crater and fell upon Farsight's force like the jaws of a vice. The Tau couldn't fire in every direction at once and were swamped within a few minutes. The last stand became a massacre as a hulking, ostentatiously dressed warboss flung himself into the fight. This could be Grog, but it could also be Captain Badrock. His mind churning with emotion, Farsight boosted away with his battlesuit teams with their jetpacks. They fired as they left, felling a great many, but the fact remained that they had charged into a trap. Those Tau who had escaped reconvened in the sky stations, conceding the zones around each asteroid and laying plans for a counterattack. Humbled by his defeat, Farsight acted only as an advisor as the ensuing war unfolded. He risked his life over and over again to atone for the deaths of so many, but the stain on his honor remained. The planet's military eventually isolated and destroyed the Ork invaders over the course of a difficult campaign. When victory was assured beyond doubt, Farsight left Atari Vo, swearing not to make the same mistakes. Yet he had underestimated the cunning of War Chief Grog once more. When Shovah's fleet emerged again from the Gulf, he was shocked to find the Enclaves in a full-scale war. Panic rising, he ordered his fleet to close with Ethereals, most populous of the worlds, and long-range communications confirmed the worst suspicions of Shovah. Those scattered asteroid ships that were not destroyed had fallen from the skies upon the vulnerable Enclave planets. Much like before, they'd been used as weapons, the night skies now empty where the asteroids had once been. With the majority of their military on campaign, the garrisons on each world were locked in a desperate fight for survival. Farsight met with his commanders at the new Firecast HQ, a giant disk city hovering in relative safety above the ocean of Ethereals. The situation was much the same on the neighbouring worlds of Lubgral and Tinekla. Even the ocean world of Salashe was prowled by iron-hulled Ork battleships, which seemed not too dissimilar to the ones seen later on Armageddon. The Greenskins were running riot through the Enclaves, and the Firecast had already made plans to withdraw into evacuation zones. His voice level and controlled, Shovah asked how they could let it get this bad. They reported the war had hung in the balance until a great Ork potentate appeared and united their armies. Since then, they had lost territory, and fast. Farsight clenched his fists in realization. The warlord he had hunted to Atari Vo had escaped, only to double back and strike while the commander was busy elsewhere. Ordering his lieutenants to remain and fight in his stead, Farsight strode quickly out of the high command, climbing into the command cradle of his crisis suit, taking off toward the horizon. Months passed, and the war for the Enclaves ground on. Shovah's armies were led capably by his lieutenants, but without their leader, it was all they could do to hold the Orks back from total victory. Murmurs of dissent and even anger sparked in the corners of the Enclaves. How could their leader desert them in the hour of their greatest need? Where was the hero of Arkanasha? Where would the great mind who had seen the Orks defeated truly abandon his own? No. Appalled by his own failings, Farsight resolved to think on the events that had led to this. There was no victory in fighting a traditional war of mobility and patience. The Orks were on the brink of total ruin, and so intoxicated by the sense of imminent victory that even killing grog would not stop them. Farsight sought insight into how he could bring the planets to their aid, as he had done on Arkanasha with the rust storms. Yet this time the scale was much greater. In his search, he skimmed low across the saline nation of Ethereals and plunged into the water, diving to the ocean bed. There he settled into a trance, sitting cross-legged for 7 long cycles. Night sharks and glowfish circled in the bubbles that bled from oceanic fissures around him as he sought inspiration from the water. Once his meditations were done, he blasted into the skies, the shadow of his suit flitting across the waves towards the great volcanoes at the center of Ethereals' landmass. With his jets equalizing against the winds around him, he opened his suit above the peak of the dormant volcano Orks, closing his eyes and feeling the air rush around him until he had come to understand it. Once his trance was over, he traveled again into a canyon at the heart of the mountain range. He ventured into the sulphurous tunnels that honeycombed the underside of the planet's crust, and with poisonous fumes and trickles of lava snaking around him, he lay on his back and communed with the elements of Earth, teaching himself to think like the slow-burning but impossibly strong anger of the planet's core. Lastly, he flew to the infernos that swept across the tinder-dry forests of Ethereals, ignited by the war raging across its surface. He had descended into the blazing sheets of fire, his battlesuit's hazard protocols flaring as its outer layers heated to critical levels. Farsight could feel his flesh begin to burn, the smell of roasting meat filling his command cradle. His skin started to sear from the tanned grey of a native Eolan to a rich, deep black. But he did not scream. When he finally left the wildfire, his crisis suit flew like an ember in the night. Over the next few weeks, there came a series of dramatic turns in the tide of the war for the Farsight Enclaves. Above the crystal plains of Tactica, elegant Tau fighters had duelled with thousands of Ork aircraft. Farsight suddenly joined them from out of nowhere, ordering every pilot to override their consoles and release their propellant gases, forming a wall of volatile emissions shaped to his instruction. He then ignited it with blasts from his plasma rifle, causing a great gale of flame to roil across the planet. As they burnt the last of their fuel to escape, the Tau aircraft were buoyed by the resultant thermals and rode the thunderhead of the titanic fireball, whilst the Ork aircraft were consumed behind them. In the process, the surface was simultaneously scoured clean of both the greenskins and the spores that would have corrupted the planet for decades to come. On the watery world of Salashay, Commander Farsight dove once more to the bottom of the ocean and planted the gifts he had requested from Ovesa. His old friend had not let him down. The disc-shaped seismic fibrillator nodes thumped, awaking the wrath of the world's oceanic vents. The seas above were soon riven by such extreme tsunamis that the Ork battleships were all capsized. Farsight soon moved on to the earthen landscape of Lugral. The Earthcast had built hundreds of oval living nodes upon the planet, each nestled safely between the towering spires of rock. The Orks besieged every last node, and the Tau were now beginning to starve. Farsight ordered the entire Teneclan fleet to enter extreme low orbit, mag-lifting the nodes clear. Then Shovah dropped a clutch of the seismic fibrillators into Bogal, the Great Abyss. Before the hour was out, the planet shuddered, and every delicate rock spire collapsed, burying the Ork hordes in 40 meters of rock. The nodes were lowered back down to sit upon the new crust of the world, back to full productivity within a week. Lastly, Farsight returned to his adopted homeworld of Ethereals, notice the similarity to Eola, and his first act was to conduct a mass Talisera bonding ritual, revitalizing the morale of his men. With the other Enclave worlds free and the cast behind him once more, he enacted a mercilessly efficient strategy that culled the Orks from one district after another. He then used powerful artificial firestorms to sterilize the environment. Very few indigenous species survived this extermination, but no Tau were lost. As his chillingly effective methods burned the Orks, Shovah's one concession to his own burning desire was the isolation of Grog Ironteeth. He located the war chief in the eye of a firestorm, attacking his own followers in an attempt to restore order. It is said that Farsight bested the beast in single combat, although none saw it. All that remains now is a sparkling globe filled with ash, the names of each enclave world engraved upon its surface. Farsight had won a great series of victories and restored himself as the hero of the new colony worlds, but the greenskin threat was not ended. Where the Orks of the galaxy hear of a good fight, the tribes and clans travel purely to start the fight all over again. The Farsight enclaves would battle the Ork menace time after time after time, most notably on the artifact world of Arthas Moloch. During Farsight's pursuit of a fleet of Ork asteroid ships to the world of Atari Vo, a number of the vessels had split off for Arthas Moloch. Sure enough, as the expedition neared that world, he picked up telltale signs of Ork infestation in the built-up zones of the planet. On closer inspection by the aircast patrols, there was little to no activity on the planet's surface. Either the indigenous lifeforms had already been conquered, or the Orks had invaded a world that was already dead. On the bridge of his flagship, Shovah smiled. The Orks would not lack company much longer. Arthas Moloch was the latest in a string of worlds to feel Farsight's wrath over the last decade. Divided and frequently leaderless, the Greenslickins were slowly but efficiently taken apart. However, a strange phenomenon occurred at an 8-pillared temple dubbed the Great Star Dace by the aircast. Wherever an Ork fell, a bizarre explosion of light spilled out. Farsight oversaw this part of the purge and had killed dozens of the Orks himself. He watched in fascination as eventually a blazing disk of light began to form. The shadows of the milling Orks beneath it danced with a life of their own. A sudden gout of energy poured from the disk like blood bursting from a dying man's lips. When the glow faded, the star-carved stone was covered with horned crimson aliens, the like of which Farsight had never seen. These long-limbed figures cut into the Orks with swords so black they seemed to Shovah like holes in space, their unintelligible war cries forcing his battlesuit's audio cutout to engage. These were demons, bloodletters of Khorne, which the Tau had never encountered before. More goblets of energy spilled out from the disk, and dozens of bright pink figures cartwheeled and capered from wherever they touched. Raising their comically long arms, they sent blazing streams of fire into the Tau above. Farsight's eyes widened as the flames splashed onto the prow of a piranha, turning its canopy to shards of kaleidoscopic glass and sending it plowing into the melee below. More flames came, turning Tau to stone, water, statues of bone. Pink horrors of Tzeentch had come. Farsight ordered the retreat, commanding his forces to fall back into the skies as quickly as possible. They acted without hesitation, leaving the nightmare of the Great Star Dace behind without a second thought. Shovah was the only one to look back. As he gazed into the crackling disk above the Dace, the portal gazed back. But that was impossible. It grew larger and larger until it filled his vision completely. It seemed that some titanic void, a rip in the fabric of reality of mind-boggling scale, had torn the heart out of the galaxy. Within it writhed 1,000,000,000,000 terrible deaths, calling to him by name. In that moment, Farsight was changed forever. He had beheld a danger far greater than any posed by the Arakan, Orks, humans and more. The disk of light was a gateway to another dimension, a dimension that was desperate to break through. As blood began to trickle from the Shovah between his eyes, Shovah lost consciousness. His battlesuit spiraled down to crash into a cobwebbed tomb, its automated systems providing just enough support to prevent him lapsing into a coma. When Farsight came to, he found that his form had been retrieved to the medbay of his flagship. The situation on Arthas Moloch had gone critical, his advisors had reported to him. There were still some Tau planetside, but they were preparing to evacuate. Drawn by battle, the Orks were rushing in their thousands to the Great Star Dace. Fortunately, the Orks, throwing themselves into the fight with the mysterious red aliens had appeared there, they were throwing themselves at them, driving themselves ever closer to extinction in the process. though his head felt like it was splitting and every joint in his aged body experienced stabbing pain. Farsight countermanded these orders. The tower would not evacuate. They had caused this nightmare, and it was their job to end it. The Ethereals attached to the council approved and nodded, insisting they must personally monitor the new threat they had uncovered. Their instructions given, the Firecast girded itself to return in force. Squadron after squadron of Orca dropships descended into the shattered amphitheatres and mausoleums ranged around Arthas Moloch's great temple as mantas dropped hunter cartridges into the orc-infested necropoli of the hinterlands. A large tower detachment had been tasked with monitoring the creatures from the rift, whilst 2 other detachments eradicated the remaining orcs at as far a distance as possible. The seething melee on the Great Star Dais was heaving back and forth as more orcs joined the fight. As Farsight and the Ethereals that had been seconded came within scanner range, a pair of massive red-winged creatures, twice the size of Farsight's crisis suit, burst from the disc in a blaze of light, hurtling through the skies towards them. Behind them came more winged beasts, some feathered in the manner of Violan rocks, some with bat-like wings that drizzled gore on the combatants beneath. It is my guess that these are bloodthirsters of Khorne, and possibly a Lord of Change. These airborne terrors split into 2 groups that headed into the wilderness. As they winged through the skies, they roared in a language that Shovah could not even bear to hear, never mind translate. His broadside teams were the first to fire at the monstrosities above. Heavy rail rifle fire slammed into the ornate brass armor of the leader, tearing off a wing and sending it to the ground. Seeker missiles and plasma bolts were added to the fusillade, and the second beast quickly diverted around an ancient temple, lost from sight. Suddenly, a third creature burst through a crumbling facade to fall upon the fire warriors beneath, the giant alien's brass axe cutting several tower in half with every swing. This time, Farsight understood the war cry. It was an archaic form of the language of the Imperium Space Marines. Its rumbling voice resounded from the shattered statues and temples of the haunted world. Blood, it screamed. Blood for the blood god. This is probably a demon prince, as I don't think Space Marines of Chaos can become bloodthirsters. The second giant beast dropped from above, its clawed feet kicking Farsight back into the ruins of a statue. A shot from Shovah's plasma rifle caught it under the chin, sending it backwards for a moment before its curling whip lashed out and ripped the arm from his suit. The battlesuit's directional scans picked up a weapon shape behind him. The sword, clutched by the statue, from his fall, had toppled. Farsight darted behind the rubble a split second before the axe smashed the marble figure to powder. The statue's blade fell free. Farsight rolled sideways, snatching it up in a smooth motion and swinging it at the beast's midsection. The creature dodged easily, launching itself into the air and bounding past his position. As Farsight pursued, he saw it bring its axe down into a nearby fountain with a blow of such power that Shovah could hear the sharp crack of the flagstones beneath. A moment before Farsight caught up, the beast went into the sky, swooping into the distance. Farsight now has the Dawnblade. Fighting the urge to continue his pursuit, Shovah sent the command out for all remaining forces to rally at his position and establish a battle line. Many fire warriors were dead, but his troops had died nobly, fighting to the last, and the battle raged still. It was the gruesome sight that greeted him at the last attack of the beast that made Farsight's throat tighten. Ethereal Aun Loss had been cut in 2, gore spurting into the fountain behind him. A great cry went up from the tower that established the battle line as the news of the Ethereal's death spread. Farsight fought to restore order, issuing clipped commands quickly to hastily reform teams into fighting strength as he sought to make sense of the transmissions interrupting broadcasts across the comm network. A great number of the bright-coloured creatures had driven the second battle group back, but for some reason they gave a wide berth to one of the worn-down statues east of the dais, giving the tower an opportunity to regroup under it. Meanwhile, the Ethereal joining the third battle group, Aun Diem, had been gored in an attack by a giant vulture-like creature, possibly a Chaos Fury. Farsight's warriors were in disarray, trapped with orcs on one side and the unidentified aliens on the other. The fire warriors were on the brink of panic, for the more they shot them down, the more appeared. It was almost like a hydra. Killing each beast caused 2 more to appear. Tapping into the feeds of the second group's battlesuits, Farsight examined their environment. In the Cardra's mist was a statue, a strange hexagrammatic medallion in its grip. Something struck Farsight as odd about it. For one, When he looked at it, the pain flaring in his head subsided. Acting on instinct, Farsight ordered his warriors to retrieve the hexagram from the statue and carry it forward against the flame beasts. A few 10 seconds came back and passed before the breathless report came that the aliens were falling back. Al-Diem's leaderless cadre adopted the same tactic after finding a medallion of their own. Farsight's mind whirled. It seemed as though it would take more esoteric means to defeat this new foe. He thought for a moment of Puretide and what he had been taught on Mount Kanji all those years ago. To secure victory, the wise must adapt. Ordering all 3 battle groups to converge on his position, Farsight rearranged his battle plan in an instant. The Fire Warriors and their teams would engage the Orks, forming periphery around the dais that could not be breached under any circumstance. The Crisis teams alone would engage the new aliens at the crackling disc, and the hexagrammatic medallions would be brought to Farsight wherever they were found. Above all, no blood must be spilt on the dais. If a battlesuit pilot is hit, he must withdraw immediately. Farsight's warriors were perplexed, but they carried them out nonetheless, to the letter. The battlesuit cadre stormed the Great Star dais as the Fire Warriors kept a perimeter so no more Orks could reach the fight. Flame-armed Crisis teams burned the remaining greenskins that still fought on the dais to a crisp, darting out of the reach of the Crimson aliens whenever they came close. As clouds of fire washed the ground, the blood covering the flagstones dried and clotted. A howl of dismay sounded from the strange crimson creatures, reaffirming what Farsight had suspected. They needed blood to survive. A warning echoed across the dais from the brave Monat, who was the latest to claim the title of Commander Brightsword, his predecessors seemingly long dead. He had spotted a trio of the massive winged beasts from the sky. They each had their axes raised as they dove straight for Shovah himself. Farsight raised his captured blade high in salute before flicking it outward, and the hexagrammatic medallions hanging loosely around it sailed in a lazy arc toward the crackling disc on the dais. A moment before the beast fell upon Shovah, the medallions passed into the blazing energy. A tremendous backblast boomed from the portal, flattening every Fire Warrior and battlesuit. As they gradually helped each other up, they saw the skies were clear and every rift creature had disappeared without a trace. In the wake of the battle, Farsight and his warriors purged the ruins of the remaining Orks. There were no cries of victory or vows. Instead, the Tau returned to their fleet in silence instead of celebrating their double victory. The last Ethereal had been found, surrounded by his unconscious bodyguards, dead. All 3 Ethereals were gone, leaving the Tau bereft of guidance. The Enclaves had lost all spiritual leaders in one tragic battle. Shovah could not shake the feeling that this was no accident, that some infeasible force had conspired against his people by killing the Ethereals. Though all his training and intellect railed against it, the visions he had seen in that portal stayed with him day and night, infecting his thoughts with ever more dangerous conclusions. There was more to the universe than the Tau's progress, unity, and destiny. Something lurked behind the material world. Something foul, something hungry, and something immeasurably evil. These revelations shook the Farsight enclaves to their core. Upon the return, the tragedy on Arthas Moloch rippled through the enclaves. The Tau had known doubt before, but the death of all 3 Ethereals cast billions of souls into confusion. How could this have been allowed to happen? Without the Ethereals, how could they prevail? Word spread of the strange entities that Farsight's cadres had fought. The Molochites, as they were known, were just simply a dangerous new race of aliens in the minds of the citizenry, and little else. Shovah, for his part, held a closer suspicion to the truth. These creatures were not of the physical dimension at all. We would know them as demons, and we know that they are not. For there to be another reality running parallel to this universe explained so many things. The rift creatures appearing and disappearing on Arthas Moloch, the blazing storms of light that had spat the human fleet out during the Damocles Crusade, the strange deities of humans and Orks, and the seemingly sentient rust devils of Arkanasha. Furthermore, if it were possible to somehow travel in this alternate realm, an empire need not know the limitations of time and space. With the benefit of hindsight, however, it was clear that the expedition's Ethereals already knew something of the existence of such things. Yet they had hidden this truth, choosing to keep them in ignorant obedience. He dared not speak of it openly, but subversive ideas had sprouted from this seed of bitterness in Farsight's heart. Perhaps the caste would be better seeking a natural harmony without the ethereal caste moderating and controlling them. Their actions had bordered on despicable in the past. Their war crimes and cold-hearted politics had seemed necessary at the time, but in retrospect were exposed as deplorable. It was said that Master Aunvar, the Ethereal Supreme and Master Tool, was able to convince any Tau he spoke to of the justice of his actions no matter what. Was it possible that the Ethereals had influenced the other castes through some other means than logic and loyalty? Were the Ethereals like the shamans that had used against the Tau in the Damocles Crusade? The more Shovah thought about it, the more he recalled incidents where Tau had acted with unnatural obedience near an Ethereal. Even the fundamental myth of Feotorn, at the end of the disastrous times for the Tower, the Ethereals appeared from the stars to broker peace in a single night, spoke more of an external force acting upon the Tau than an internal resolution. Heresies reeled through Farsight's mind, taking him to the edge of panic. For him to reveal these terrible truths would shake the Empire to its core. It may even bring about the Mon Tau, the time of horror before the Ethereals, all over again. Yet the secrets were of such magnitude that putting them to the back of his mind was impossible. With a sickening lurch of thought, he realized the most dangerous threat to the Tau Empire was himself. Leaving his battle suit behind for more devoted champions to use in his stead, Shovah fled into the searing wilderness of the Ethereals plains, exiling himself to a twilight existence of arid caves and dust, with nothing more than his own dark thoughts for company. The Tau of the core Sept worlds heard progressively less from the Farsight expedition as the years wound on. Soon, the probe sent across the Damocles Gulf failed to reappear altogether. Commander Farsight, whose natural lifespan was long spent, was officially proclaimed dead. The entire Tau Empire mourned the passing of their mightiest hero and the end of his quest to bring the light of the greater good to distant stars. The truth came to light some decades later when an Outrider probe's routine orbit led it past the Farsight enclaves and back to the Sept worlds at the Empire's core. Instead of being barren of Tau life, the colonies were flourishing. They had clearly found their own way in the galaxy, independent of the commands of the Ethereal Council. Even their Sept colours and symbols had changed, and Aunvar was furious. How could the Empire's most beloved champion have turned his back on his people, putting his own interests before the greater good? How could he have led so many of their people astray? The Ethereals' white-hot anger at Farsight's desertion cooled into a cold fury that was far more dangerous. Since the passing of Ethereal Supreme Aunwei, Master Aunvar had become the Supreme Ethereal in his stead. He used every bit of his influence to destroy the hero he had created all those years ago. He informs the Ethereal Council of the probe's findings, insisting that Shovah was a dangerous rebel, a rogue influence whose heresy should be condemned in the most public possible way. All images of Farsight were to be destroyed, all monuments to his glory reduced to rubble, and all mention of him erased from history. The entire area of space on the far side of the Damocles Gulf was renamed the Forbidden Zone, off limits even to the most senior of Tau. All across the Empire, Shovah's supporters were forced into hiding. Those who spoke well of him were taken away for questioning sessions, from which very few returned. Only on his homeworld Viola did a few images of Farsight linger, for the commander had many supporters on that world. To destroy all sign of his presence would risk a backlash that Aunvar was wise enough to avoid, even in his anger. Instead, a single statue was to be left standing outside his former training dome of Montir, repurposed from a glorious monument to a grave reminder that without the guidance of the Ethereals, even the finest mind could be turned from the light. Later, when the third sphere of expansion began and Commander Shadowsun was awoken, Aunvar spoke to her privately. He informed her in some way of what Farsight had done, using his master skills for politics to convince Shadowsun that Farsight was the ultimate traitor. Enraged, Shadowsun travelled to Viola, destroying the statue to Farsight with her twin fusion blasters, proclaiming that he was gone, he was a traitor, and he would be forgotten as such. As a result, I get the feeling that if Shovah and Shovah should meet again in the future, that confrontation would end in blood and not much else. On the far side of the Damocles Gulf, the Farsight enclaves continue to forge their worlds to better suit their own destinies. One world for each caste. Violos for fire, and the others for the other castes we mentioned during the Ork attack. Yet with their leader missing for so many years, they too began to see Shovah as a distant memory. Generations were born, lived briefly, and died out. Over 100 years passed without sign of Farsight. As time marched on without him, he became little more than a whispered myth. Until 997 M41. As that year drew to a close, long-range reports of a strange galactic cloud reached the fringes of the enclaves. It fit no recognized energy patterns until Commander Arakon, who had been a wise military leader for many years, correlated it with recent data from his hidden allies in the core septs. Remember those supporters who went into hiding earlier. Silence fell over the Firecast High Command when they saw what the readings represented, the tendrils of a Tyranid Hive Fleet. The Tau had fought against Hive Fleet Gorgon for 2 years earlier that century and had learned much. The Tyranids were a foe like no other, able to adapt and spawn at an appalling rate. It was imperative that the fleet be taken apart before it made planetfall, or their swarms might spell death for every living thing on the enclaves. The aircast fleets from each enclave were mobilized and led by Admiral Koro Kai of Tinekla. Learning from the mistakes made against Hive Fleet Gorgon, Koro Kai's fleets isolated and destroyed the leading elements of each biofleet, carving attack patterns around each tendril and reducing it to spattered ruin over the course of 6 weeks. In the end, the sheer numbers proved insurmountable, even with the masterful efforts of the aircast. 3/4 of the bioship clusters were set upon and destroyed, but as the aircast were fully engaged, the 4th cluster entered colony world space above Violos with relatively little opposition. As the skies grew sick with the Tyranids' pre-invasion corruptions and desert vegetation swelled and bloated to better sate the coming fleet, a hail of mycetic spores rained down. Longer lived than any Firecast warrior before him, now at nearly 300 years old, the hermit Shovah watched the skies turn purple-grey above his desert refuge. The cacti and creepers that had provided him with water grew, out of control, into horrible new shapes. Something was attacking, something that was changing the substance of his home to better suit its purpose. Shovah could think of one reason why an invading entity would do this. They were fattening the planet like a grox calf intended for feasts. The invaders were coming, and he knew that his people needed him more than ever. Amidst the terror and desperation that erupted, a note of joy rang out on Violos. An old, dark-skinned warrior had walked into the great museum of Violos, claiming to be Farsight, and demanded his revered battlesuit be returned. He submitted to the required genetic tests with dignity and determination. Sure enough, Shovah had returned in the hour of greatest need. The Firecast took great heart as a living legend emerged to guide them. They had soon redoubled their efforts to hold back the swarms infesting the plains. Studying every scrap of information his commanders could supply, Shovah coordinated a new war effort hinging upon aerial supremacy. A mass spearhead of 80 crisis teams engaged every winged Tyranid they could find to the exclusion of all else, tearing them out of the sky with long-range missile fire while staying well away from the swarms below. Once they had aerial success secure, the fire warriors of Violos boarded the anti-grav docking pontoons that Farsight had requisitioned from the orbital stations, using them to skim across the plains. Wherever larger Tyranids were found, they were engaged and destroyed by volley after volley of pulse fire from the anti-grav pontoons. In this manner, Shovah intended to break the Tyranids' leadership in a similar way to the Orks, in a worldwide Mont Ka, destroying the mind links coordinating each brood. Over and over, the Tyranid leaders were hunted and destroyed by pinpoint firepower, and over they were reinforced by mycetic spores. Thousands of citizens died every day as the invaders probed at every defense and settlement, exploiting the least weakness to break through in a tide of bodies to slaughter those inside. Each time Farsight adapted, optimizing protocol to better slay the foe, the Tyranids would reinforce and adapt in turn. It burned him to admit it, but the plan to cut off the head of his foe was not working. Montcar had been denied. His old friend Ovesa was clinging to life by a virtue of age-regressive drugs that he had invented. He suggested that if Montcar would not work, perhaps Cao Yon, the patient hunter, Shadow Sun's tactic, might be given a chance. Farsight's brow wrinkled, but he gave the idea consideration nonetheless. Their world was ripe, on the brink of being devoured by the Hive Fleet above. As horrifying a notion as it may seem, perhaps they should not try and prevent the attack. Instead, they would allow it to happen and strike back. The next night, Farsight and his 7 most trusted commanders escorted Ovesa to Viorlos's Earthcast research facility, Viorotil, deep in the Valley of Dust. Given time, the ancient scientist believed he and his colleagues could develop a countermeasure that could destroy the Tyranids. Shovah knew this was their last gambit. With his planet orbit overrun, he ordered the rest of the Tau to evacuate, leaving 12 Tau on the planet. Farsight and his 7 commanders, Ovesa, and 3 of Earthcast Luggral's most capable scientists. Using samples of biomass gathered from the field, the veteran scientists worked night and day to develop a biological countermeasure. Their research facility guarded by 6 crisis battlesuits, including Farsight, 1 broadside, and one of very few riptides that had been accidentally diverted to the Farsight enclaves from the ships en route to Mugalath Bay on Agralan during the 3rd sphere of expansion following its creation. The enclaves didn't have riptides when they began their expeditions, but they were invented and then diverted by some very sneaky commanders. Shovah had deliberately kept the facility's defense as small as he dared to escape detection, but on the 8th day, the swarms found them. Thousands of weapon beasts poured through the gullies and valleys from every direction, blade-limbed colossi in their midst. Farsight relayed his greatest of respects to his comrades and prepared to give his life to buy a few more seconds for Ovesa. The battle that unfolded was the stuff of legend. Oblotai 9-0, the broadside battlesuit operated by the AI engram of Farsight's old team leader, bullseyed dozens of Tyranid leader beasts from his vantage point. The 7th Commander Brightsword's fusion blades blazed bright as they cut through the giant battering ram monsters known as Carnifexes that assailed the gates. Wise Arachon molded complex firing solutions to defend every ingress, coordinating the flame of blasts from Shavastos, the one survivor of the Puretide engram chips in the Damocles Crusade, and Torchstar, a rebel of the Empire who had brought the Riptide, to consume the greatest number of the lesser weapon beasts wherever they scuttled through. When a towering monstrosity killed Shaso Varghar with a blast of bioelectricity, burning him to death inside his Riptide suit, Commander Bravestorm, long interred within his life-supporting battlesuit, charged under the Bio-Titan's midsection. I'm assuming this is a Trigon Prime of some sort. Powering his ancient Onega gauntlet to maximum, Bravestorm punched out its thorax in a gory salute to his fallen comrade. Farsight duelled with the hissing leader beast at the swarm's heart, matching the Dawnblade against the crystalline swords of the hive creature. Even Ovesa was able to join the fight at the last, remotely accessing the interface of the fallen Riptide and bringing its weapon systems back online in order to deliver the death blow to a squat-bodied brood beast known as a Turbigon, birthing lesser Tyranids into the facility's corridors. Suddenly, a cloud of dust whirled up, obscuring the combatants as the Manta missile destroyer Orks Cao Yon hovered above them, as it had on Arthas Moloch. Ovesa signaled that he had summoned the aircast to extract them. The deed in the facility was as good as done. One by one, the battlesuits boosted into the air and boarded the Manta, while the research facility was buried under leaping Tyranid bodies. Of the brave Earthcast scientists, only Ovesa survived. 8 of the Tau had escaped. They would become known as the 8. Over the next few cycles, the world was stripped bare of every last shred of biomass. The mouthparts of the hive fleet had descended to feed, hungrily sucking up the rendered down gruel of their conquest from the many digestion pools. Farsight and his commanders monitored the spectacle from high orbit. As the twin flames of grief and anger twisted in his gut, Shovah began to doubt the course they had chosen. When he cast a questioning glance to Ovesa, however, the scientist just smiled, pointing back to the bioships themselves. Farsight saw nothing at first, but soon a black stain spread across the chitinous flanks of one vessel. Within a matter of moments, the affliction had spread to a second, and then another and another, until none were free of the tendrils. The bioship shuddered and writhed as the discoloration blossomed outwards to cover them entirely. One by one, the fleshy tyrannid vessels fell into themselves, rotting and falling away like a piece of fruit decomposing in a matter of seconds. Before the hour was out, the bioships had entirely disintegrated. The countermeasures made by the Earthcast, explained Ovesa, have been a suite of self-replicating poisons. The agents have been on time-delayed release in order to ensure they were fully inside the Hive Fleet before activation. The vector of transmission had been the bodies of the Earthcast themselves. The scientists had imbibed the poisons as their last act upon Violos before they were consumed. Once they were broken down into digestion pools, the codes they had locked infected the air itself. As Ovesa had hoped, the Tyranids had even stripped most of Violos' atmosphere to fuel their conquest. In doing so, they had doomed themselves to swift, painful death. The last act of these scientists moved Farsight on a deep level. Here was the truest expression of the greater good, not in politicking, not in war, but in self-sacrifice so others might live in their stead. Though he was used to the warriors of the Firecast laying down their lives in the name of the Tau Empire, to see this selflessness in another caste humbled him. The scientist's deaths had ignited the flame of ambition in his heart once more. Shovah strove to see Violos rebuilt and resettled, the three principal cities named for the three Tau scientists that had given their lives so the Enclaves might live. The wastes and volcano ranges would be rebuilt as Tau cities that boasted many grand monuments. On Lubgral, the favoured planet of the Earthcast, field after field of white oval memories were lain in the name of all those who had given their lives for the greater good. No longer would Shovah shy away from his destiny as leader and hero. The fight must go on. As a bonus segment, we will now speak of the Dawnblade and the Eight, for these are weapons and people associated with Farsight's story now so intrinsically that they are worth a small segment on their own. The Dawnblade is even older than the Imperium of Man. Fashioned eons ago by the strange race that once inhabited Arthas Moloch, it has been forged from materials that even the Earthcast cannot fathom. Its blade is sharp enough to cut rock, and since taking it on Arthas Moloch and modifying it for battle, it has been Shovah's weapon of choice. Unbeknownst to Farsight, however, the ancient sword has a dark secret. Its blade is made from chronophagic alloys. Whenever its wielder cuts a life short with it, the natural span that he stole from his victim is added to the wielder's own. This is why Farsight has been able to live for almost 3 centuries. Though he has his suspicions that the blade has prolonged his lifespan, if Farsight ever did find out the truth, he likely would commit ritual suicide then and there. We don't know who made this weapon, but I suspect it was either the Old Ones or the Necron Tyr. I couldn't say which either way. And now for the Eight. Of course, we have Commander Farsight, whose tale we have told over the past 3 videos. Absolute legend, this guy. We have Honor Chasseur Ovesa. Ovesa is not a Chasseur, for he is not of the Firecast and so cannot hold the rank Chass, but he is an old Earthcast colleague of Farsight kept alive by microdrones. He pilots a modified Riptide battlesuit. This Riptide battlesuit is a far better shooter than normal, but it cannot fight in close combat at all. It's weapon skill 1 in the game. We have Commander Bravestorm, a blackened, twisted creature with a comprehensive light support suite. He is the same warrior who once saved Dal Ryu through self-sacrifice. We have not told that story, so I cannot say more on it. He is forever, however, confined to his battlesuit. He cannot leave it, much in the similar way a Dreadnought pilot cannot leave his walker. We have Commander Brightsword. Half a dozen generations separate this pilot in the heavily scarred suit from the original Commander Brightsword, who fought on Arcanartia, but he has inherited all of that lineage's legendary ferocity and has pledged his life to the service of Farsight and the Enclaves. He's the only other Tau to wield a melee weapon. There is an Omega Gauntlet, but this is the only other melee relic you can take. It's called Fusion Blades. They're a little bit unreliable, but they are quite fun. We have Commander Shovah. He was the first Tau fitted with a Puretide neurochip during the Damocles Crusade. He was saved from his subsequent lobotomization by Commander Farsight, if you remember back to the last video. His prototype neurochip has degenerated badly, however, so Farsight had him secreted away in stasis until he could be cured. Decades later, Ovesa was able to recalibrate the chip and reawaken Shovah. We have Shastra Oblotai 9-0. He is not crewed by a flesh and blood Tau. It is a mnemonic AI engram of the original Shastra Oblotai who trained Farsight in his first battlesuit engagement and is one of the few to understand Farsight's troubles with fighting at long range. We have Commander Arakon. Born and trained on Violos, he was the overall commander of the Enclaves at the time of Farsight's return. His analytical mind and the advanced new support systems such as an Enforcer battlesuit from the recently arrived Vision of Aun Shi helped him make the most of his anti-infantry weapon suite, which includes a cyclic ion blaster and an air-bursting fragmentation projector. And finally, we have Commander Torchstar, or Sub-Commander Torchstar, the youngest of the 8 and a defector from the Tau Empire. Torchstar is impetuous and from Viola, Farsight's homeworld. She has an affinity with fire that has seen her immolate hundreds of the Tau's enemies. They are the 8. They have weapons subscribed to them, at least in this book, which is the old Farsight Enclave supplement, so you can field them. I'm not sure, did they have a formation? Kind of curious whether they did. It appears they didn't. Shame. I thought there was something that allowed you to hit them together and got extra rules. Doesn't look like they did. Shame. So yeah, there we go. That is the end of the tale of Commander Farsight. This guy is a legend, okay? I don't care if you don't like Tau. I don't like Tau, generally. But this story has been an absolute pleasure. I don't really know what to say other than Farsight, you are awesome. As I said at the end of episode 2 when we talked about at the ending, I said I'm going to buy a model for Farsight. But reading that, telling this story, it's not just buying him. I may have to build an army just around Farsight. Because, wow, this guy. Like, I hate Tau. I hate the Tau ideology. I quite like the models. I don't mind the rules as long as you're not toxic with them. But I never got behind their ideology, their lore. I don't like Ethereals. So Farsight is a breath of fresh air for me. And someone who I could really get behind. And so, congratulations, Farsight. You just made me like Tau. I know. What am I saying? Anyway, that is the end of this video and of this little mini-series. I really hope you have enjoyed it. I know I have, and it has been a true pleasure. Make sure to leave a like on this video, share it around, and leave any comments down below. If you have any other famous character you would like me to talk about in a future 40k Stories video, I would love to hear from you because I'm happy to make one. For now, though, this is the end. My name is Michael for Tactica Imperialis, and I will see you all again. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.